laugh, like, subscribe.
A married Irishman went into the confessional and said to his priest, "I almost had an affair with another woman." The priest said, "What do you mean, almost?" The Irishman said, "Well, we got undressed and rubbed together, but then I stopped." The priest said, "Rubbing together is the same as putting it in. You're not to see that woman again. For your penance, say 5 Hail Marys and put $50 in the poor box." The Irishman left the confessional, said his prayers, and then walked over to the poor box. He paused for a moment and then started to leave. The priest, who was watching, quickly ran over to him, saying, "I saw that. You didn't put any money in the poor box." The Irishman replied, "Yeah, but I rubbed the $50 on the box, and according to you, that's the same as putting it in." A newlywed farmer and his wife were visited by her mother, who immediately demanded an inspection of the place. While they were walking through the barn, the farmer's mule suddenly reared up and kicked the mother-in-law, unfortunately killing her instantly. At the funeral service, the farmer stood near the casket and greeted folks as they walked by. The pastor noticed that whenever a woman would whisper something to the farmer, he would nod his head yes and say something. Whenever a man walked by and whispered to the farmer, he would shake his head no and mumble a reply. Curious, the pastor later asked the farmer what that was all about. The farmer replied, "The women would say, 'What a terrible tragedy,' and I would nod my head and say, 'Yes, it was.' The men would ask, 'You want to sell that mule?' And I would shake my head and say, 'Can't. It's all booked up for a year.'" A photographer from a well-known national magazine was assigned to cover the fires at Yellowstone National Park. When the photographer arrived, he realized that the smoke was so thick that it would seriously impede or make it impossible for him to photograph anything from ground level. He requested permission to rent a plane and take photos from the air. He arrived at the airport and saw a plane warming up near the gate. He jumped in with his bag and shouted, "Let's go!" The pilot swung the little plane into the wind, and within minutes they were in the air. The photographer said, "Fly over the park and make 2 or 3 low passes so I can take some pictures." "Why?" asked the pilot. "Because I am a photographer," he responded, "and photographers take photographs." The pilot was silent for a moment. Finally, he stammered, "You mean you're not the flight instructor?" A woman goes to her boyfriend's parents' house for dinner. This is to be her first time meeting the family, and she is very nervous. They all sit down and begin eating a fine meal. The woman is beginning to feel a little discomfort, thanks to her nervousness and the broccoli casserole. The gas pains are almost making her eyes water. Left with no other choice, she decides to relieve herself a bit and lets out a dainty fart. It wasn't loud, but everyone at the table heard the pouf. Before she even had a chance to be embarrassed, her boyfriend's father looked over at the dog that had been snoozing at the woman's feet and said in a rather stern voice, "Skippy." The woman thought, "This is great," and a big smile came across her face. A couple of minutes later, she was beginning to feel the pain again. This time, she didn't even hesitate. She let a much louder and longer fart rip. The father again looked, and the dog and yelled, "Damn it, Skippy!" Once again, the woman smiled and thought, "Yes." A few minutes later, the woman had to let another one rip. This time, she didn't even think about it. She let rip a fart that rivaled a train whistle blowing. Once again, the father looked at the dog with disgust and yelled, "Damn it, Skippy! Get away from her before she shits on you." A young lawyer was defending a wealthy businessman in a lawsuit. The lawyer feared he was losing the case and asked his senior partner if he should send a box of very expensive cigars to the judge to earn some favor. The senior partner was horrified and explained, "This judge is a very honorable man. If you do that, I guarantee you will lose the case." A couple of days later, the judge ended up ruling in the young lawyer's favor, delivering a massive win for the businessman. Patting him on the back, the senior partner asked, "Hey, now aren't you glad you didn't send him those cigars?" The young lawyer said, "Oh, I sent them. I just included my opponent's business card in the box with them." A young man met a beautiful girl and agreed to spend the night with her for $500. So they did. Before he left, he told her that he did not have any cash with him, but that he would have his secretary write a check and mail it to her, calling the payment "rent for apartment." On the way to his office, he regretted what he had promised, deciding that the whole event was not worth the price. So, he had his secretary send a check for $250 and enclose the following note. "Dear Madam, Enclosed find check in the amount of $250 for rent of your apartment. I am not sending the amount agreed upon because when I rented the apartment, I was under the impression that it had never been occupied, that there was plenty of heat, that it was small enough to make me cozy and feel at home. Last night, however, I found it had been previously occupied, that there was no heat, and it was entirely too large. Upon receipt of the note, the girl immediately returned the check for $250 with the following note. Dear sir, first of all, I cannot understand how you expect a beautiful apartment to remain unoccupied indefinitely. As for the heat, there is heat if you know how to turn it on. Regarding the space, the apartment is indeed of regular size, but if you don't have enough furniture to fill it, please don't blame the landlady. An elderly Florida lady did her shopping, and upon returning to her car, found 4 males in the act of leaving with her vehicle. She dropped her shopping bags and drew her handgun, proceeding to scream at the top of her voice, "I have a gun, and I know how to use it. Get out of the car!" The 4 men didn't wait for a second invitation. They got out and ran like mad. The lady, somewhat shaken, then proceeded to load her shopping bags into the back of the car and get into the driver's seat. She was so shaken that she could not get her key into the ignition. She tried, and then it dawned on her. A few minutes later, she found her own car parked 4 or 5 spaces farther down. She loaded her bags into the car and then drove to the police station. The sergeant to whom she told the story nearly tore himself in two with laughter. He pointed to the other end of the counter, where 4 pale men were reporting a carjacking by a mad elderly woman. Every spring, as soon as the snows thawed, a certain mountain woman would come down into town, have a baby, and gather supplies for the summer. After a few years of this, she looked despairingly at the doctor and said, "Doctor, I don't know how much more of this I can handle. We got us 8 kids now, and I just don't know how we can go on. I got to do something about having all these babies or I'll just lose my mind." The doctor scratched his head and wondered how to gently instruct the woman on how to curb her ordeal, and finally told her to pick up a 10-gallon bucket along with her supplies. "And every night when you go to bed, I want both of your feet in that bucket, and don't take them out until morning." So the lady was off, and all of her problems seemed to be solved. That next spring, right on cue, she walked into the doctor's office and promptly delivered another child. "Ma'am, I thought I told you to sleep each night with your feet in a 10-gallon bucket. What happened?" "Well, you see, doctor, the store was all out of 10-gallon buckets, so I just figured 2 5-gallon buckets would do the trick just the same." The room was filled with pregnant women and their husbands. The Lamas class was in full swing. The instructor was teaching the women how to breathe properly and the men how to provide the necessary reassurance at this stage of the plan. "Ladies, exercise is good for you," the instructor announced. "Walking is especially good for you. And gentlemen, it doesn't hurt to take time to walk with your partner." The room was very quiet. Finally, in the middle of the group, a man raised his hand. "Yes?" the instructor asked. "Do you mind if she carries a golf bag while we walk?"